Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, a weekly podcast by Lace Partners, a fundamentally different HR and payroll consultancy. Each week, we tackle some of the most interesting topics facing senior HR professionals. So whether that's from employee value proposition, performance management, people strategy, or even payroll, we cover it all. So join us for the next 30 minutes. And if you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on with the show. Today's episode of the HR on the Offensive podcast, I am joined by Aaron Alburey, our co-founder, and Aaron and I had a really interesting chat about a campaign that we are just about to launch called Driving Business Transformation. Now, at the time of recording, we were still trying to decide what we should call our campaign, and so you might hear Aaron and I talking about HR orchestrated transformation. The premise is still the same, the relevance is still the same, but just wanted to give that little qualifier at the start of today's podcast. And Aaron and I talk about why HR or the people function need to be front and center, leading not just HR transformation for a HR department, a HR team, but actually business-wide transformation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, back again for the new year. This is the first recorded audio that we've done of 2025. By the time this is released, it'll be probably the beginning of February, because it's linked to a campaign that we are launching at Lace Partners. I will come to that in a minute. But before I do that, I'm joined by our co-founder. It's Aaron Alburey. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, very well.
We are ready to make the most of it, right?
How are we recording a podcast for February?
I know. We're coming up to 5 years of the HR on the Offensive podcast as well, which is crazy. That was in March 2025. So
that's a lot of episodes.
A lot of words, a lot of speaking, and really good stuff as well.
Some great guests, some great topics.
We're going to talk today about our campaign, HR Orchestrated Transformation. We're going to set the scene on that, because that's a campaign that we've just launched as of this week, as is our want on this podcast. Kick us off with a fundamentally different question. If this is the first time that you are listening to the podcast, what we do is we ask a fundamentally different question, which is not related to HR. Aaron, you have just got yourself a little dog, haven't you?
I do. Ralph.
A little dog, Ralph. And Ralph has been in the office, and inspired by Ralph, today's fundamentally different question is on an article that I have read, which is about a dog trainer who was sharing foolproof ways to stop pets sniffing embarrassing things. If you could get Ralph to be trained to find anything, because as we know, dogs have fabulous nose and they can find lots of great things, what would you train Ralph to find?
It's a great question. My answer would have been easy. Any cake. I would have trained him to find cake. It would have been easy. Find cake. We'd have gone to cake. Cake would have been eaten. Easy. I'm trying very hard not to eat cake. With the inauguration just having happened, I think I would train him to sniff out cryptocurrency. That's what I would do. I'd train him to sniff out cryptocurrency because, quite frankly, why wouldn't you right now?
I mean, that would be quite some skill.
It would be a skill.
To sniff out a digital currency. But hey, this is a free-range podcast. There is no wrong answer.
Thank you very much.
I used to lose my keys quite a lot. And so finding keys would be useful.
Yeah.
But actually, shoes, I seem to always be looking for a certain type of shoe and never find that. So being able to say to a dog, can you find my blue pair of trainers or my white pair of trainers? So that's kind of taking it to the next level.
Having Ralph now, I can tell you exactly where to find the shoes in his basket. That is where they will be.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Right, let's talk about our campaign, HR Orchestrated Transformation.
Yes.
A bit of an emotive campaign name, but really what we're talking about here is workforce transformation. We think we should probably start off by maybe framing why we've decided to run this campaign. Why our chief people officers, chief human resources officers and HR teams starting to think about this? I think that's one question. But probably before that, perhaps there's a framing question as to why we think it's important that organizations or HR teams are leading business transformation. So can you give us a little bit of context there? Because that's the key thing here, isn't it? It's not HR transformation, it's business transformation.
It's quite deliberate to talk about HR orchestrated business transformation, because I think workforce transformation has been going on for years and has done all over the place. And HR is always involved at some point in that in most businesses. I think the difference that we have seen on the run up through Brexit, then COVID, and now through digitization and AI and all the rest of the social economical changes that are going on, the Ukraine war and so on, the Gaza and Middle East wars, that kind of change has driven an unprecedented level of business transformation. And what we've seen is through the dialogue with HR directors across sectors, we operate across multiple industries, and hear a consistent story, which is the CPO has very successfully, and the HR directors have very successfully navigated the people functions into that strategic position through COVID, shown the value. And as a result, as we've now tipped into continual business change, there's a big demand for them to be a critical element in shaping it, driving the strategy, making sure it's the right thing to do for the business and understanding those impacts and making them sustainable. Traditionally, the business maybe does a transactional transformation and then asks HR to mop things up at the end to make sure people end up in the right boxes. I think there's definitely been a mood change, a tone change in a lot of the conversations we're having. We ran a paper in 2024, which was around HR to workforce transformation, a research paper that got us into talking to about 30 or so business transformation leaders. It's CPOs who are transformational, business transformation leads who are not outside of HR, data and analytics leads to get their perspectives as well. And I think we got some really interesting insight from that. And one that our friend Julian would talk about a lot is that business change is no longer a one-off. It is a continual thing. It's happening all the time. It's business as usual. That's one thing. The second is the requirement on data to lead and be data-led is higher than ever. And the people agenda is more understood and more considered than ever before. And that from a point of view of leadership, culture, EVP, sustaining behaviors, changing, and so on. And as a result, the demand is on the function to orchestrate that across an organization. So that's the background to why it is.
Okay, I've got a few questions here. As you referenced the research report, which was almost the beginning of our journey, but beginning of us starting to catalogue and quantify this and this mindset shift. We've been talking about this for a while. My first question is, if we go back to conversations that you've been having for the last year, 2 years, 3 years, how much do you think HR teams have been empowered to lead on business-wide transformation, or is that something that you're now seeing that there's a desire for them to do it? So where are HR teams at with this idea of, yes, we want to be front and center, we want to be the ones leading on the business transformation rather than just focusing on our own house?
So I can take 3 examples, talking to 3 different CPOs and senior HR leaders in the last 2 weeks. One of them led the Brexit separation for their bank. They were selected out of all the other leaders in the organization to coordinate and lead that. Another one led the COVID reaction for a global bank and a global financial services organization across multiple locations. Leadership team, and they chose one of the people leaders. And then one of our CPOs in a digital industry started off life as the transformation director for the CEO before being appointed as the CPO. So I think that recognition of it being a critical skill set that one now exists in leadership in HR, but also needs to be in HR is key now to that change and what we're hearing. And it's certainly a shift in the narrative in that space. One of the things we hear regularly, Chris, is that we wish we had more skills to lead the business through this, to help them. We've invested in our tech, we've invested in our data, but we're not using it in the right way, or we don't have enough OD change capability to help the business through. We lean too much on third parties, and therefore we end up with lots of different answers and ways of doing it. And there's a mess to clear up at the end to make sure it all fits together. I think our perspective is there is a very strong role for CPOs and people functions to play. It is about that coordination, but it is also about the sustainability. If you're going to do any form of business transformation, you then have an impact on employee value proposition, experiences, policy impact, leadership behaviors. Those are all the things you need to continually adapt to make sure that sticks. And we talk about change sticks. It's one of the other campaigns we've used before, right? So change sticks, all of those things, to be successful, needs a people function engaged and really working on it. Hence why I think from our perspective with this campaign, it's about how do you join business strategy and transformation that the business is trying to achieve through to a sustainable people agenda.
Linking in with that, I've got a couple of questions that pop immediately into my head. We've held a couple of roundtables in the back end of last year where we've been starting to stress test this idea. How much do you think HR and HR leaders have the appetite to lead this? Like, is it their big thing that they're focused on for the next year, or are there other things that they're focusing on? You remember we did a few years ago, we did a research report, which was like, what's your one big thing at the time? There was things like, getting the right talent into the business, looking at my employee value proposition, or post-COVID, a lot around flexible working. Is this the next big thing for some of the people that you've been speaking on? Is there the appetite for it for HR leaders?
It's a great question. Because we still have conversations that are going on around skills, talent. We just ran a campaign on talent and skills because it's front and foremost. But that's part, I think, of tooling an organization to allow them to make better data-led decisions on what they need, where they need it, how they're going to deploy it, which helps drive that kind of transformation. I think it's very hard right now for any organization not to be engaged in some level of restructuring or transformation, whether that's cost saving because of external pressures on their operating cost base, rising changes in the NI legislation, rising cost of living, supply chain cost changes, etc., inflation, or they're trying to be competitive for growth and get ahead of their competitors on a digital agenda, or quite often we're hearing both. And that drives an agenda in the HR functions that we talk to, at least, that is very much focused on how do we enable the business to change at pace, but keep the essence of who we are and make sure we retain the best talent that we've got through that level of sustained change. So I think it is on most people's end. I was just reflecting, you were talking about running the different focus groups. So you take the people we talked to at the paper and we talked to the various groups over the last 3 months. We've talked to around 100 business leaders in HR, from CPOs and maybe some of their direct reports, or business transformation directors in organizations. And they're all focused on that right now. What I'd say is, they're focused with a greater or lesser degree on that sustainability piece. Still, some of the conversations are focused around getting to that point of just get us there in one piece and make the change happen. Others are looking at, okay, well, how do we make sure that wraps in and sticks into the organization? And that's very much where we're coming from with this campaign. How do you use data to get ahead of it? How do you shape it in the right way? How do you make sure you're not overly reliant on third parties? You'll need some in that mix because it's a peak of work. But how do you make sure that you have a capability that you can hone for future change? How do you make sure it's consistent? And how do you make sure behaviors stick on the flip side of that transformation?
The question a minute ago was around our HR leaders. Do they have the appetite to lead on business transformation? How difficult do you think it will be? And I appreciate every business is different. Some industries will be different. But it's more of a cultural question. How difficult do you think it will be for the business to let HR be that orchestrator? Do you think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges for some HR leaders, getting the business on board to say, we understand that people is our biggest cost as a business, so why would we not let the HR, the people function, lead on business transformation? Do you think there's going to be some resistance from some organizations? And if you're a HR leader listening to that, any kind of thoughts around how do you get that flipped around so that you are getting the rest of your C-suite to say, you actually need to lead on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And undoubtedly, for every one or two businesses that we see that are leading from the front with people-led business transformation, there's equally the same amount, if not more, that are reactive and being told what to do. So it is an ongoing challenge for that. It depends on the ethos of how people set up functions in their organizations. We'll win through that in various degrees. In terms of how you change it, and if Julian was here, he would talk about this as well. A lot of it comes down to using data to allow you to make the right decisions. And a bit like finance, HR is awash now with data. In a lot of organizations, you may have some work to do to get that gathered, but let's assume you have some systems in place and some data available. It's about how you target that around what you're trying to achieve as a business around the transformation. Is it about skills that are available? Is it about attrition rates in that environment? Is it about the performance of the line managers? What can you add to the discussion around the type of transformation that allows you to be at the table to have that conversation and shape it. And CFO will bring the financial information and the rates of return. We can bring a lot of data around the success rates post a merger, attrition, retention of key workforces, or skills availability in the market to do some of the things that we want to do. That's where I would start. I'd start by understanding the problem, dissecting it down to what data we can bring from a function as a profession to actually enable that to be smoother, to make it better, to help with the decisions that need to be made.
Absolutely love it. Let's talk about the campaign then specifically, just because there might be a few people listening saying, okay, great, you're doing a campaign, but how does it play out? We're going to run this campaign for the first half of 2025. We're breaking it down as an event-led, we're calling it an event-led campaign. We'll be running events over the next few months, breaking down the different sections. I'm going to talk through the different areas that you and Julian have talked about, which each of the different campaigns will focus on, taking you through that journey. And then at the end, we'll produce some additional podcasts, maybe narrowing down. We might get some external voices as well to give their perspective on different areas. Hopefully there'll be a white paper at the end of it, just culminating our views that people can then download. Perhaps that'll be June, July time. But we've broken it down into preparing to transform. How do you prepare to transform? The design and the decisions and design of transformation. How do you deliver change and make it real? How do you make your transformation sustainable? You've touched on some of this, so perhaps if you could do a minute or two on each as we start to wrap up the pod, kind of what we'll look at. The final one is Workforce Transformation 2.0. What does that look like for HR professionals? Could you go through what we're going to cover broadly? And appreciate that you've touched on that in the discussion, but just rounding it off.
The first thing you say, our campaign is very event focused. So I think as you listen to this, if you have a passion for workforce transformation, if you're an HR professional or a business transformation professional, and you really have a passion for this, please get in contact. Let us know. What we want to do is gather those people who have a passion together for this, talk about these topics, talk about what makes it work, what makes it not work. Get those views out on the table. We have a lot of experience, but we really want to hear from our customers and people who have a passion for this. So please reach out. If you just take each of those, so prepare, we touched on, right? That's how do you use data, insights? How do you get the leadership aligned around it, leading through change? How do you set the groundwork for a successful longer term transformation that looks beyond the go live date and looks to actually sustain change going forward? What are all the elements you need to bring together, and what are the tool sets that we as HR professionals have to bring stakeholder engagement, stakeholder navigation and management, all those sorts of stuff that we do, right? The design decision stuff, you can imagine skills and talent is a very big point. Thinking about what you're trying to achieve from a design perspective. Are you looking to do productivity savings? Are you looking for operational efficiency? Are you looking for agility around expansion in geographies? Are you looking for growth? What's the kind of model you're trying to develop for your business? And therefore, what are the design decisions you need to make in order to bring that behavior to life in your organization? How do we start with the intent of the future change and bring it into the behaviors, performances, etc., that we want to design, and the raft of discussions and decisions that those bring into it? You talk about change, making it real. We touched on that. How do you make change stick? One of the biggest things that we find on scale HR transformations, especially when we're in doing optimization work with a client several years after a transformation where it might be faltering, is that change element was underplayed. We didn't spend time with people on their accountabilities. We didn't actually telling them what work would be different and why would it be different and what we expect of them, and helping them through that transition, rather we just went, hey, you've got a new title, here's a new job, go on with it, right? So that's where we'll focus on that. And that ties into that sustainability piece. There's a lot of tools that HR profession brings to a sustainable business transformation, because you think about how are you going to do rewards and benefits, long-term incentives and short-term incentives? How do you use those to drive behaviors? How do you use performance management and goal setting to make sure that everyone's aligned around what you're trying to achieve? How do you do performance reviews in 360s? And maybe we use that to make sure that in that first 2 years, that you're really landing the goal change. There's a lot of stuff that we can bring to bear that really sort of helps with sustainability. Leadership behaviors is another big one to talk about. I was talking to us in the last 2 weeks about microcultures. They look at their business and they go, we're made up of 25 different microcultures because we did loads of mergers and acquisitions. We have this great EVP that spans everything, but it's so general and everyone underneath is actually doing their own thing in their own culture in the way they've always done it before. What works from that and what doesn't work? What do you want to keep? What do you not want to keep? Workforce Transformation 2.0 is a grand title. There's nothing new in the world, right? That's the thing with this stuff. For me and for Julian and the rest of the team, we talk around workforce transformation. Pav's very passionate about this as well. And we're talking about doing it holistically. We're talking about not executing just a reaction to a change, but rather shaping it in the right way to make sure you are considering all the elements that reinforce that system of change. At the heart of that is the use of data and insights to underpin your decision-making and help you move forward at pace.
Love it. So that's a quick whistle stop of the campaign. It's going to run for the next 6 months. What we'll be doing is there was a campaign page which you can access on the Lace Partners website. If you go to lacepartners.co.uk/insights, you can see all of our different campaign elements. We will be adding to that when we produce new podcasts, when we produce some video. As Aaron mentioned, we'll have some events as well. So if you do want to be involved in the events, all you need to do is there'll be a form to fill in at the bottom of the page. Just fill in that form. And then, of course, with these events that we run, they tend to be invitation only, but we're always open to talking to people about what their thoughts and opinions are, because we have to have a certain number of spaces that we allocate to different businesses. But please reach out to us, fill in the form, get in contact with us. If you've got any thoughts on it, or even if you fancy having a chat about it on the podcast, then reach out to us. But from myself, thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you very much. Very excited about this. I think it's a great topic.
Very of the moment. We talked in 2019 about how HR needs to step out of the shadows when we created this podcast, and based on the white paper, HR on the Offensive. This feels like it could be the next frontier.
Certainly. Little did we know how much we were going to step out with COVID.
Yes. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. We are available wherever you get your podcast. But from myself and from Aaron, thank you very much for joining us. And hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.